Hey, people renting a place in Japan. Just imagine this. One day you open your mailbox and find a notice saying, "We are raising your rent." How would you feel? You'd probably think, wait, is that even allowed? Actually, it can happen, but don't worry. There are proper rules, and there are ways to handle it that you definitely want to know. Today, I'm going to explain clearly to foreigners planning to live in Japan what the reality of rent increases is, and how to deal with them. If you watch until the end, you'll be in a position where, even if it happens, it won't scare you, so make sure to stay tuned until the very end. First, let's start with the most important premise. In Japan, landlords cannot raise the rent arbitrarily. This is clearly regulated by law. So, a sudden one-sided increase like your rent will double next month is basically not allowed. However, here's the key point: there are exceptions. For example, if maintenance costs rise, taxes increase, or the value of the area itself goes up, and if a new station opens nearby or the area becomes trendy, surrounding rents can rise sharply. Also, if your rent is clearly lower compared to the surrounding area, it might be adjusted to match the neighborhood rates. In such cases, the current rent may be judged too low compared to the market, and an increase could be permitted. In fact, there was an extreme case in Tokyo where rent was proposed to rise 2.6 times. Of course it was eventually canceled, but the fact that a notice arrives is not unusual. So, Japan isn't completely risk-free, but because there are rules, there's a system in place to protect tenants. This is a really important point, so remember it. Next, let's talk about the right way to handle a rent increase notice. Let's say that notice actually arrives. The worst thing you can do is panic and think, this is hopeless. First, calm down. In Japan, there are proper rules governing rent increases. You can't suddenly raise the rent starting next month. Usually you'll get a written notice at least 1 month in advance. The notice clearly states the reason for the increase, the new rent amount, and the date it will start. So, first, read it carefully. If Japanese is difficult, get it translated, or ask someone for help. The key is not to make assumptions based on vague impressions. Next, check your rental agreement. This is really important. See what the contract says about rent changes or whether there's a special clause stating that rent won't be raised. If such a clause exists, it's very strong. Basically, it takes priority. So, just because you get a notice doesn't mean you must pay the new amount. It's important to pause and think carefully here. Now, let me share some negotiation tips and techniques you can actually use. So, what do you do if you review it and think, I can't really agree with this? The answer is simple. You can negotiate, but negotiating in Japan has its own nuances. First, don't go in aggressively. For example, saying things like "this is unfair" or "I will never pay" makes the other side defensive, and the discussion won't go smoothly. So, what should you do? I'll explain 5 techniques in order. Technique 1. Express your feelings. First, express that you like the apartment and would like to continue living there if possible. Then calmly say, "However, this amount is a bit difficult for me. The order is very important." Technique 2. Provide reasons. Don't just rely on emotions, have solid reasons. For example, research the local rent rates and explain for similar conditions, this is the usual rate. And if the rent increase is due to taxes, make sure to check whether prices and taxes in Japan have actually gone up. For example, you can check price trends on the English site of the Statistics Bureau of Japan. Technique 3. Explain the condition of the apartment. Also, check the apartment's condition. If facilities are old or broken, that can also be used as negotiation points. If there are specific issues or areas that need improvement, it's a good idea to document them with photos. Technique 4. Show that you are a good tenant. Paying rent on time and having no history of trouble are highly valued. Empty units are a big loss for landlords. So if the landlord wants you to stay long-term, they might limit the rent increase. Technique 5. Negotiate flexibly. One more thing to remember, you don't have to go all or nothing. For example, "I'm okay if it's only a small increase," or "please wait a few months," or "I'd like the facilities repaired in return." This kind of flexible negotiation is also possible. This is very much a Japanese-style approach. Now, let's discuss the last resort options if negotiation is difficult. Some of you might feel nervous negotiating on your own, especially as a foreigner. Language barriers make anxiety natural. If you're nervous about speaking directly, starting with an email is perfectly fine. You don't have to force it in person. Also, Japan has proper consultation services available for foreigners. For example, services like Japan Legal Support Center or Foreign Resident Support Center. There, you can get legal or daily life advice. Even questions like, "Do I have to pay this?" are fine. In fact, it's better to consult early. If discussions still fail, there's a final option called rent deposit with the court. Simply put, you deposit your rent with the court, not the landlord. It's not that you don't pay, it's more like, I'm placing it here temporarily while this dispute is ongoing. This allows you to buy time while preventing forced eviction. However, this is a bit complicated. All procedures are in Japanese and need to be maintained continuously. So, you should definitely consult a professional-like lawyer before using it. A key point about rent deposit with the court is that it's not a one-time process. You have to do it continuously every month, so it can be quite burdensome. I think it's enough to just remember this as a last resort option. Finally, let's talk about common troubles foreigners fall into and how to handle them. This is super important. The biggest trap for foreigners is proceeding without fully understanding. For example, ignoring a notice you don't understand, or hastily agreeing out of panic. Both are dangerous. So first, make understanding your top priority. Get a translation or ask someone. The key is to grasp the content accurately. Also, one way is to check if the agency you used when renting has multilingual staff. Just doing that prevents half of the potential problems. One more Japan-specific point, it's the communication style. Overseas, it's normal to assert yourself clearly, but in Japan, it's a bit different. You can express your opinion, but how you do it is crucial. Many Japanese are not used to overly direct speech, so be mindful. Just speaking respectfully can completely change how they respond. This is a truly important cultural point. So, let's summarize today's content. First, in Japan, rent cannot be raised arbitrarily, but it can increase for valid reasons. 4 key points on how to handle a notice. First, when a notice arrives, calmly check its content. Then, check your rental contract carefully. If you're not satisfied, it's perfectly fine to negotiate. When doing so, rely on facts and the way you communicate, not just emotions. Finally, if you feel it's too difficult to handle on your own, look for a nearby support center for foreigners and get help. Just knowing this alone will let you live in Japan much more confidently. It's normal for landlords and tenants to have differing opinions about rent increases, so disputes happen frequently. By acting on what we discussed today, you can take the first step toward negotiating smoothly. To avoid losing out because you didn't know, make sure to prepare properly now. On mooovin, you can search for apartments in Japan from anywhere in the world. We offer support in Japanese, English, Chinese, and Vietnamese. So be sure to check out our official website from the link in the description. If you thought this video was helpful or interesting, please subscribe and hit the like button. Well then, see you in the next video. I'm cheering with all my heart for your happy life in Japan. Bye bye.